Hello, kindred explorers of the ancient mysteries. It's Govin here with TeutonicShamanism.com. This video is a repost from my vlogging channel. I think a lot of people will enjoy it if they hadn't seen it, and I'll apologize in advance with the bad sound quality. Didn't have this when I recorded it 3 months ago, but there's still a lot you can get from it, so enjoy the video. Something I've always vaguely been aware of but never fully understood until I started exploring this in more depth was this idea that the days of the week are based roughly around something pagan, and it wasn't until more recently when I started becoming interested in my own indigenous European roots that I looked into this in more depth, started learning more about the Germanic tribe-based pantheons of deities, and then I also already had an understanding of the sort of more romantic tribe deities, so I'm referring to Latin and Spanish, French, that whole region of Europe, the more Mediterranean, all has that root as well, which of course everything in Europe has the same sort of Proto-European root, and you can kind of see some similarities between them there. But basically these days of the week, and this is actually also the world over in other pagan traditions all around the world, which is very peculiar in that they all line up with the same planets in most cases. So at the core of it, there's this sort of astro-theology basis to it, but often there's the naming of the days which correspond to a deity. In some cases it is the planet, as we'll go over shortly here. There's differences in the way the days of the week, when they start in different traditions around the world, and even to this day, I believe it's only several countries that start technically the week on a Sunday. As far as I know, in US, Canada, England, and I believe Japan and these other countries, it starts on a Sunday. Some places it starts on a Monday. That's a little beside the point, because you're still going to end up calling the same day, and everyone agrees there's 7 days of the week. If you actually kind of think about what would happen if civilization were obliterated and people just, for whatever reason, forgot what day of the week it was, you wouldn't have any reference for why there'd be 7 days of the week. There's nothing that says there needs to be 7 days in a week. It's just something that's so strongly ingrained in people's minds. I always think that's something interesting to ponder on. There's probably more esoteric reasons behind that. I don't understand that personally yet. There's all sorts of non-factual ideas around that, like the 7 chakras, they correspond to the 7 days of the week, and there's a different chakra focus for each day. That could be true. However, again, there's no hard facts on that as far as I know. There might be buried away somewhere. Depends on what the root tradition was around creating this idea of 7 days a week. So we're going to start with Sunday. And for each day in the English language, I'll be talking about the Anglo-Saxon term, because that's pretty much what the origin of the English names came from. That's the Anglo-Saxons of England, who were a Germanic tribe. And you can also see the similarities between the Anglo-Saxon term and occasionally I'll mention the Germanic or Norse term. So those are offshoots of German tribes. And I'm also going to go over the French term, because that also has some interesting things on some of the days to get into. And the French often has that basis in the Latin, which also influenced English. So modern English is actually a mishmash of German combined with a bit of French. Not a ton of French, but there's enough there, especially because there was the Norman invasion, which was a Germanic tribe that overtook part of France, and then they came over to England. So they brought in some of the French language, which they adopt. Language is a peculiar and interesting thing to study if you ever have the chance to look in depth into your native tongue in terms of the origins of it, and just seeing the influences of the cultures that existed that created the language that you now use. I mean, for a lot of people it's English, and it might not totally line up with their ancestral sort of genetic heritage, but if you happen to be from somewhere where your root language is related to that area, it's worth looking into, in my opinion. So Sunday, in the Anglo-Saxon, it's Sunandag, And I might be butchering pronunciations on a lot of things here. And in German, that's Sonntag. And that's interesting in that you have the term son or sun there. Literally, the word sun is right in there. Same with the English. And while there's no direct deity there, it's worth mentioning that Sol is the Norse deity for the sun. It's a female, sister of Mani. And I'll be talking about Mani in the next day of the week in a moment. And it's interesting because a lot of traditions think of the sun as being masculine and the moon as feminine, whereas in Germanic traditions, they're brother and sister, but they're reversed in terms of the genders of the sun and the moon. So Sol, and there's an accent on the O, I'm not sure if it's pronounced a little different. That might be the origin of the term solar, but also in Latin, the day of the sun is Dies Solis. But what is actually referred to as Sunday in the Roman times, after they became Christian, was Dies Dominica. So the Roman Empire, when it was all over Europe and influencing, the UK and all these Germanic tribes, they were still polytheistic, and it became Roman Christian, and they sort of centralized into a monotheistic religion, and they changed Sunday to Dies Dominica, as far as I understand it, and that means Day of Our Lord. So they're removing the idea of a planet, and that morphed into the French dimanche. So that's it for Sunday. We'll come back around to talk about each day and my take on how one can have an intention with this and use this knowledge to organize your week. So on to Monday. The Anglo-Saxon origin for Monday is Monendag. To skip ahead to the French, it's Lundi, which literally comes from Luna, the goddess of the moon. But to skip back to the Germanic side of it, the brother of Sol, the female solar deity, is Mani. And again, that's Norse. Norse is this offshoot of Germanic tribes, and so that's all related. And the idea of Ásatrú is that there is a common root to these Germanic tribe-based religions. They even go further back and influence the Mediterranean and things like that. But there's bigger differences between the polytheistic traditions of Southern and Eastern Europe than there are with the Northern Western Europe regions. So Ásatrú uses the Norse pantheon because it's the most well preserved, because it was the last basically to be invaded and completely, or somewhat completely. Technically none of the Germanic areas were completely Christianized. They still retained the most pagan traditions, and that's shown by the fact that the days of the week still have these pagan gods. So if you ever develop an interest in this idea of Ásatrú, understand that the Norse tradition, even if you're not Nordic, that's the one that's generally talked about most, just because it has the most information and preservation present. But a lot of the German and Anglo-Saxon tribes had virtually identical deities with almost virtually identical names. Now Mani, it's not confirmed, but it could be the folklore that developed into the term man in the moon. So there was a lot of depictions of Mani in the moon, literally with the moon around him. So that's one possibility, and that was an Anglo-Saxon thing, that was a Germanic thing. So that's an interesting tidbit of information there. So the next 4 days of the week are much more literal in having a deity's name associated with them. The Sunday and Monday still have the sun and moon, but Tuesday comes from the Anglo-Saxon Teutonic, probably butchering that like I said, and the Norse god Tyr, so Tyr's Day, but in the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon it was sounded more like Tiwaz, and that was their god of war. And in the French, Mardi, which is French for Tuesday, sounds quite similar to Mars, and that has that root Mars in there, and Mars is the god of war as well. So again, this is the similarity between Southern Europe and Northern Europe and East and West. Moving on to the central day of the week, Wednesday. This comes from the Anglo-Saxon Woden's Dag, and The deity root of this is Woden. So Odin or Woden or Wotan is sort of a central father figure type deity in these Germanic traditions. The equivalent in French is Mercredi, and that is the god Mercury. A little bit different in terms of the qualities associated with the deity, but you might see some similarities. There's communication, magic, wisdom, and actually Hermes, the equivalent of Mercury, is associated with that as well, and that even goes to Thoth, the Egyptian deity, and that's the god of writing, the god of magic. So you can see these qualities are a little further reaching than just being centralized in Europe. On to Thursday, people will be familiar with this one for sure. Anglo-Saxons, Thunresdag. That comes from Thunor or Donar in, I believe, Old German. This is Thor's Day. People might not know that Thor, while it's the Norse deity of thunder, the exact same qualities are ascribed to Thunor, which is the Anglo-Saxon, or Donar, the Germanic. Holds a hammer, no matter the name, is the god of thunder, has these qualities about them, defender of mankind. And in French, jeudi is Jove's day, and Jove is the Roman god Jupiter, or the similar name or equivalent name. So if you look at the qualities of the god Jupiter, they can be ascribed to be similar to Thor. Friday is Frigadag, and I posted a picture on Instagram talking about this the other day, but Frigg is the Norse goddess of love, beauty, and many other qualities. And in French, that day of the week is called Vendredi, and that is Venus. And if you know anything about the goddess Venus, very similar qualities to Frigg. And finally, probably the most confusing and unsure day of the week, Saturday, the Anglo-Saxon Saturndag. There's no deity associated with this as far as we know in terms of the English. The French is Samedi. It's associated with Saturn, the planet. And that's very apparent from the English as well as the French. And you look into the Roman side of it. When it became Christian, it became the Sabbath day, but the term Saturn doesn't come from Sabbath. They're meant to sound similar, but the actual English root is hard to discern if there is sort of a spiritual god or goddess associated with it. If you look at the qualities of Saturn in the Norse or Germanic tradition, the closest thing I can see is possibly Loki, and the only real connection I see with this is in Norse. That day of the week is called Lortag or Lurtag, and that is the washing day. And Lurtag kind of sounds like Loki. I have no idea if it's related at all. This is just me speculating. And that's just a term for it's the final day of the week, and it's the day you finish up your chores and things, washing day. Just to also add in there, Saturday is kind of, if we're talking about Saturn, it's a very strange quality and energy. It's not evil, but it's not totally good. It's often associated with the god of time, Kronos, who has a sickle and is associated with death. Loki is a trickster god, if it is indeed associated with Loki. That's why I was kind of saying Saturn is kind of like Loki, and possibly the relation there. And so you think about people on Saturdays, they're often going out at night, they can get up to mischief. So that could be the quality there. So after you have your chores all done for the day of Saturday, wrapping up loose ends, take the time to get into the more mischievous side of life, I guess, if that's what you're drawn to. So you might be wondering, what's the point of even knowing all this? I mean, it's kind of interesting to know that the days of the week have these origins, but how do they even apply today in everyday life? Well, if you are someone that likes to plan ahead or finds use in that, I like to think of the days of the week as having these qualities inherently built into them. It's just the natural way the week unfolds. If you think about the qualities associated with these deities or the planets and just what people naturally do, it kind of lines up that way. So let me kind of go over it, and by knowing this, I think we can emphasize that in our life and really put more intention into our days so that we have those qualities manifest and help us attain our goals, essentially. So Sunday would be, the day of the sun, that day of probably the most appropriate for any kind of spiritual worship, if you happen to have that type of inclination. It's time to spend with family. People already naturally do this. Generally, in any part of the world that's been very Christianized, that is the day that's considered most appropriate for that. Coming to Monday, I tend to think of the moon as kind of reflective. It's the first working day of the week, but you might want to do some of this on Sunday, but if you're focused on being with family and all that, you don't want to get involved in the coming week. You want to take that time off. And then so coming into Monday, the moon represents that reflective sort of internal place. It goes through those phases of the moon. And if you use that time to plan your week, to set all these intentions and goals up, that, in my opinion, would be an appropriate way to go about using that day of the week. So I'm not saying you don't do other things, but that's the best time to do that, so that you have this momentum that carries through the rest of the week. Come Tuesday, that's the day that's associated with Mars and the god of war, or Tiwaz, or Tyr, and that has that energy of the most force, the most aggression, so you can have that intention that was more reflective suddenly flip into going from probably the most passive day of the week. Everyone's downtrodden, and Mondays have that understanding of being the least liked day of the week, so you can have that reflection, almost like hibernation day, turn into this force that you drive and get yourself propelled on. Come Wednesday, you're kind of reaching the middle of the week. You want to, at least the work week, so there are qualities associated with Woden or Mercury or Odin, whoever you choose to associate with that day. And Woden or Odin both had one eye that they used. And they both had spears, they both had two ravens that would circle above them or be on their shoulders. So there's an idea that Woden had one eye turned inward, one eye turned outward. So that's kind of a good idea, that this middle of the week you have that balance of self-reflection inwards with the outward production, and that can be kind of like a checking in that your goals are still in line from Monday and Tuesday. Coming into Thursday, you have Thor, the god of thunder, and if you're looking at from the romantic side, the god Jehovah or Jupiter, and this is often associated as the day of abundance, and Jupiter was very much associated with wealth. And there's actually studies that have been done, I'm not going to link to them or anything, these are in the back of my mind from something I read, that Thursday is the day people get the most work done. And that's been looked at, I guess, in all types of workplaces. So it's not quite the end of the week, so people aren't already slacking off, but they have all this momentum from the previous week. They're just getting into the groove of things, and that can be your day of the most impact. So you think of thunder and lightning and that impact. Hammer of the gods, bring it down and get your shit done. So then coming into Friday, to the end of the week, at least working week, and you start moving into that space of maybe being a little more romantic. A lot of people set their dates, whether with new people or their girlfriend, boyfriend, on Friday. That's one of the most romantic days of the week in that respect. So that's one way to look at it. You can look into the qualities of Frigg and Venus if you want to learn more about that day of the week and bring in some of these qualities. And finally, Saturday, that day of washing, that's where you're tying up loose ends. A lot of people do a lot of household chores on that day, going shopping, doing your laundry, and getting things ready for the start of your week on Sunday. Some people do that stuff on Sunday, but I think, depending on your own personal lifestyle, if you leave Sunday to being really devoted to family and spiritual matters, then you really want to have Saturday as your day of tying up those loose ends. So I hope you enjoyed this running over the days of the week and the pagan roots of the existence of these days, and hopefully you can take something from this. So that's it. I hope you liked it, and I'll talk to you again soon. Take care, and may your allies, gods, and ancestors be with you.